You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What if the way we've been taught to treat mental health is missing something essential? Join me for today's paradigm-shifting episode. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. What happens when someone inside the system begins to question its foundations? In this episode, we hear from a psychiatrist who spent decades working within traditional mental health care, only to discover that the answers he was seeking couldn't be found in diagnoses or prescriptions. His story is one of reimagining what healing can look like when we move toward human-centered ways of understanding ourselves. Dr. Fred Moss's life work has been dedicated to transforming mental health conversations. As a psychiatrist for nearly 4 decades, he has seen firsthand how the conventional approach to mental health often falls short. His journey started with a deep passion for authentic communication, which led him to challenge the traditional reliance on diagnoses and medication. Over the years, Dr. Fred has developed holistic, human-centered methodologies that prioritize self-expression, creativity, and genuine connection as the foundation of healing. Dr. Fred is the founder of Welcome to Humanity and the True Voice Method, and he helps people find and express their authentic selves in ways that foster true healing. Through his books, Find Your True Voice and Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression, courses, and podcast appearances, he guides individuals towards self-discovery and transformation. Dr. Fred believes that at the heart of all healing is human connection, and he is passionate about bringing this message to a global audience. Here is my interview with Dr. Fred Moss. Hi, Dr. Fred. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because embracing holistic healing is such an interesting space for our conversation today. And of course, there'll be different nuances that we'll be touching on while we record this episode, and I look forward to finding out what those are. Welcome to the podcast.
It's really great to be here. Bonjour. And it's a pleasure and honest privilege to be in this conversation with you overseas. And, you know, the magic of technology and the magic of the present day and age, as nasty as it can be, it does come up with things just like this, which is, it's so hard to overlook how the importance and the incredible technical advancement that allows for this exact exchange to take place. And I just want to acknowledge that as a, way to counterbalance all the stuff that we often get mired in about how terrible it is to be in present times. And maybe it's just not 100% that terrible. That's what we got going. So it's good to see you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think this podcast probably wouldn't exist without these technologies available to connect with all the wonderful guests such as yourself. So yeah, thank you for touching on that. And for starters, can you give us a bit of insight about yourself and your own journey, your own story, and how that connects to what it is that you do today and how that all comes together so listeners can get to know you a little bit?
Sure. So I was a born healer. I mean, that's when I look back at this question, I just get that that's what my arrival. And when I checked in when I was born. I was born to a family in chaos and disarray. I had 2 older brothers and, teenage brothers by that time. And they had already been in, their 2 teenage brothers with my parents. And so there was a lot of disturbance in my home. And I arrived to bring love and peace and joy into that family. That was the whole point. And they've told me that. My brothers have told me that since. I did a pretty good job for a few years. I have not been consistently doing a good job for all my life, but for a while I did a job, little roly-poly, really fun, funny kid, super smart. And, they fed the flames, my brothers and my parents. I was, pretty precocious. And by the time I was in kindergarten, I knew a lot of things that none of my peers knew. And, I'm not bragging. It's just data. And now that I look at it, it's not like I was better, smarter, more than. It's just that data came in different ways. But I was so interested in communication. I was so totally interested in communication early on. I remember being in my playpen and watching my brothers and parents kick it around and thinking, someday that'll probably be me. And I thought you kind of learned that in school. That's what they told. That's what else are you going to learn? But of course, that isn't what happened in school. They just squelch and make you regurgitate and, give you high credit passing points if you do a very good job at, copying somebody else's statement. So open discourse wasn't encouraged, but I continued to want to see it and be with it. And as I further advanced in school, it was less and less available, and finally, I decided after high school, it was like, where there was no chance to be really, to have an open discourse, open dialogue. I was like, okay, one more chance. I'll try college. So I went to college and I was at the University of Michigan for a while. And that didn't work out either. I mean, it didn't even happen in university. It was like, wow, this isn't where it's going to go, And I like learning in the streets. I like being with people. I like being outside. That's where I really knew that I was learning something that was valuable. So I dropped out and took a bus across the country and went to Berkeley, California to find out what my life was all about. And I did a pretty good job of that, but that wasn't sustainable either. And then there was something, my brothers and parents told me about this new industry that had just started and it looked like it had a big future. And they thought I would have the aptitude to do it well. You might have heard of the industry. It was called computers. And so they were like, oh, you should go be a computer guy. So back to school, I went one more time as a computer guy. So that goes back to what we're saying earlier, like massive technology since that day and age, massive. And as a computer guy back then, though, it's just punch cards, batch jobs. The only computer in all of Michigan was this 2-acre facility on the campus, and that wasn't my future either. So I dropped out again. And, I just wanted to communicate. It's really what I wanted. As I look back at it now with, it's emotional. That's really what I wanted, but my whole life. So I told my mom, I'm not going back to university ever. She's like, okay, but then you got to get a job. Moms will be like that. Right? So she got me an application for a civil service job, a government job. And this job was at a state mental hospital, actually, for adolescent boys. And there you go. I was like, okay, I'll turn that in. I thought I'd just stay for 3 weeks. I just wanted 3 paychecks so I could buy myself a car and drive around and figure out what my life was about. I didn't see this coming at all. And orientation was 3 weeks. So I stayed for orientation. And on the 4th week, I'm like, I think I'm going to leave. And my friend encouraged me to stay. And we stayed 3 more weeks. And I was like, okay, this isn't that bad, and I learned how to communicate and I was getting paid for it, for the first time. That's all they wanted me to do was be with these kids 6 or 7 years younger than me. Not very much kids, really. Or maybe we're all kids. That's another way to look at that. And the thing I didn't like about that job was psychiatry. I loved the job. It was cool. Afternoon shift. We did great stuff. The kids were fun and it was fun to heal with them and to communicate. It was open. It was good. But I didn't like the future of psychiatry. And it was very clear that there was something wrong with the field. It had changed and it was no longer respecting people at the level that I wish they would. And I thought I had to do something about that. My brother was already a psychiatrist, 14 years older than me. So I was like, okay, this can be done. So I dug my heels in and back to school I went one third time and then graduated medical school and, and soon found myself in a psychiatric residency and then in a child and adolescent psychiatric fellowship. Kaboom, here I am. I'm like, wow, what just happened? 13 more years, And now I'm a glorified childcare worker because I've been doing it the whole time. And it's like, okay, here comes Prozac. While I was in med school, Prozac was introduced. That just changed the world as drastically as anything ever has. It just made, if you're uncomfortable now, there's something wrong with you. It's an incredible transformation that got made with people. This is paradigmatically shifting straight up, chemical imbalance if you're uncomfortable. Wow. It's interesting. It's an interesting theory. It certainly protects those who might be working to make you uncomfortable. So being anxious, being depressed, being nervous, being awkward, being distracted, being afraid, being angry, they might be okay things to be. Might not be the recipient's fault. We don't blame a log for burning in a fire, So I've been fighting with this the whole time, and Prozac, kind of like, well, what is this Prozac? What does it think it's going to do? And I watched the advertisements get very lofty, and even saw the news when they said they might put it in the water system of the big cities in the country. Like New York and LA will put Prozac in the water system. Like, wow. So it kind of dug me in, but it also created a real problem for me for the last 36 years, which is, the typecast version of what a psychiatrist is one has now, gotten very tight to a diagnostician, which I cannot stand doing, and then a medication provider, which I hate worse than diagnosing. And this problem has persisted and created some duplicity in the way that I walk through my profession. On the one hand, I really love what I do. I love talking to people. I love meeting people. I love making a difference. It's super fun to listen and be with when I'm successful at that. I'm not always successful, but I don't like diagnosing people, and I don't like medicating people. I would like it if I thought it was helpful. Of course, that's what I'm really interested in. Hope that's clear, Of course I would like it. If I could find something like that worked, I'd hand it out on the street corner all day long.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing that part of your journey, which sounds like it took a little while to come back to your roots of being that healer that you felt called to be, but here you are. So I actually find it really refreshing that you don't like diagnosing and medicating because that is obviously one of the things that psychiatrists will generally do. They will generally diagnose and medicate. So I find this very refreshing.
I still have to do it. When I'm
Yeah.
Dr. Moss, I have to give a diagnosis. I then, upon that diagnosis, am very compelled to go down the protocol that's already been established for what happens if you're audacious enough to give someone that diagnosis. It's just a rough ride, duplicity. It's like, how do I balance that? How do I integrate those things? And it's created some soul sacrifice, some serious heartache at times in my life. And I still stand on the notion of what little Freddie knew in that playpen. That is, communication is at the heart of all healing, period. There's no comparison at all in levels of potency between what happens when you connect with somebody and anything that any drug can do or any diagnosis can ameliorate.
Yeah. What do you find difficult about handing out a diagnosis or medicating? What do you find is difficult about that? What do you find is unhelpful, maybe even about that in your practice?
Yeah. Well, who do I think I am is the first thing. What? You don't look right to me, and therefore there's something wrong with you. It's like there's something. It's something really just hubris, and something. There's a lot of arrogance and audaciousness in that concept, and it's pretty random. It's when you look at how the DSM got created, it's unbelievably unrooted in any kind of truth of reality. Unbelievable how unrooted it is. I'm not going to go into detail right now with that, but that's not my space, but it's just unbelievable. And to have watched it all develop, it's like, oh, As soon as I give you a diagnosis, then you're going to actually think about that you have that thing, that it came down and got you. And you may even find the tendency to, to like relinquish, abdicate responsibility for some of your behaviors or thought processes. That's not me. That's my ADD. That's not me. That's my bipolar. My doctor told me I have major depression. My doctor told me I have social anxiety. I'm on the spectrum. I have narcissism, whatever. Whatever, really? You expect that to mean something?
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. Absolutely. Do you find that your patients or your clients that they want a diagnosis? I feel like sometimes when we are looking for an answer, being told we have something or we are something sometimes gives us a feeling, okay, now we know. So now we know what's wrong with us, right? So how do your patients feel about that?
Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever heard me speak to this at other broadcasts, but this is a great question. I think that psychiatry is alone in medical subspecialties as being a field that if you tell somebody there's nothing wrong with them, they get angry. They don't come to see me to find out if there's something wrong with them. They come to see me so that I can then identify what they have already determined is what's wrong with them. It's why you go to a psychiatrist. You are definitely not going to a psychiatrist to find out that you're okay. So it's an interesting field that way. Sometimes when I find myself sort of adjusting my clients towards being okay, which is like, oh, no, you know what you're just experiencing right there? We all experience it. They're like, really? I go, yeah. We all understand. We all get it because we're all human. We know what you're talking about. And they like it for a while, but there is some, we'll call it counter trauma that happens when you no longer have that reason to explain why you just did something you're not proud of. I don't like being the trigger guy for that. That's not, I don't like being the trigger guy for that.
Yeah.
If you come in and somebody else has given you, if you've already seen 2, 3, 4, 7 different trigger guys, and you come in with all 7 of the diagnoses that they no doubt gave you, that's okay with me, I suppose. But I'm not going to be the 8th one, and I'm not going to be the first one if you come in without one. It's rough. It's rough being alive. Have you noticed? It's rough.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. On some days it's rougher than others.
Maybe, but while
Yeah.
the day is happening, there's challenges
Yeah.
every day. And it's rough. It's rough. And, being nervous, anxious, angry, sad, fearful, unsure, unsteady, non-sleeping, addiction seeking. I get it, dude. It's rough being alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when people hear this is where healing happens. You got some medicine that does this? I want to see that. I'll start prescribing that. If you have a medicine that does this, I'll give away samples.
Mhm. So is there space in your practice to start addressing your clients' concerns in a more holistic manner? Are they mostly, in your experience, even open to that? Or as you said, they're looking for this diagnosis when they're coming to you. But is there a space to start re-educating or opening up that door to a different approach? Because a lot of the things that we experience, be that stress or anxiety, even depression, anger, a lot of those we can work with holistically, I would say even quite successfully in many cases. So is there an open door for that, or do you find that most people are very resistant to that?
Well, it depends how they come to me in the first place. If they're assigned to me by their insurance company or something, then they're coming to me like the next doctor in order to give them their diagnosis or something like that. Or sometimes there's secondary gain. There's a very significant secondary gain from obtaining a diagnosis. You get special dispensation and courses sometimes, or you can get disability or short term, or you can explain to your girlfriend why you're such a jerk. Sometimes there's secondary gain. But for the most part, the people who stay with me, and a good handful of people who like working with me, really are seeking to relieve themselves of the incredible burden of walking around with a conception that there's something inherently wrong with yourself. It's a problem. Look, here's an important disclaimer that I have to drop in every podcast, and I do it here too. So a number of your listeners are very, very happy with their present diagnosis, their present treatment plan, their present medication, their present therapy. Very happy with it. So happy with it, in fact, they wouldn't change it for the world. And to those people, what I say is, please keep for sure doing what you're doing. I'm not telling you to get off that ship at all. I really am not. In fact, if you get to a place anywhere else in your life where you're unwilling to even consider doing something different, you should keep doing that too. You really should. That's a special space to land in. This conversation is for the tens of millions of people who don't think like that, who really think that they've been underserved, underdiagnosed, overdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, undertreated, overtreated, mistreated, undermedicated, overmedicated, mismedicated. They know what I'm talking about. And it's not for everybody. So is there room? Sure, there's room, and I have to gauge the faucet, I can be a pretty broad pipe about this and podcasts and, not just a pod, I don't know how many hundreds, thousands more people might hear this. So, pay attention. People like being heard and connected to, and that's what I use as my lead. It's not a matter of medication working or not working. They don't do what they're supposed to do. I think that's very clear. They do something sometimes. That's also very clear. It leaves people worse off frequently enough, and that's also clear. And some people know that and want relief. They stay in this conversation of connection and appreciate the value of that at a level they had maybe already forgotten or hadn't thought of. So that's, for that group, it's not a matter of is there space. It's like, yeah, for sure. Everyone, all patients, all friends, all clerks, everyone. People like being connected to. I'm not very good at it. I really am not. I'm really good at talking about it. I'm not very good at it, but I do know that that's where the money is. I think we all know that. I'm not really saying anything that's that controversial.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think many people, many more than we want to say, feel that way. They do feel like they have not been treated in a way that was helpful. Maybe even their problems haven't moved at all, changed at all. I was in therapy for 10 years. I didn't resolve anything. So those are some of the issues that inevitably will come up. And they're reality today. And they are part of our healing journey if we are willing to step through that door and actually I feel like there's a piece of self-responsibility in there that can be very hard to face. Having a diagnosis of, I was diagnosed with depression, for example, then it was easy to say, oh, I'm sad because, or I can't do this because. But the part of actually taking responsibility of saying, well, is that really where I should put the blame? Or can I do something about this? Is there a proactive way that I can actually face this? That was much harder. So there is that step in there as well that I think it's not the easiest way to actually face it and do something about it. So yeah, but I hear you on that. So if people are open to actually communicating and connecting and addressing that in a bit of a different manner, what can you do with them? What can you work with them on? And how can you work with them then when we are stepping away from sort of the traditional more medication and diagnosis piece? How can you work on those things?
Well, you don't really ever arrive. Every time you take the dance floor with somebody, you're taking it at the start of a new, you can't walk in the same river twice. It's the same thing. And it's just in the listening and in the connecting. I think it's by maybe setting example or sharing the progress or sharing the humanity. I've watched people light up like Christmas tree after the last person that connected to them like I did was, I don't know, 30 years ago or something. And they're just like, there's like, it's in some ways after the first 3 or 6 meetings, if we've gotten to the point where there's freedom of my, I no longer feel pathological and I don't take medicines anymore. Well, then why come see me? Because that's the goal. I love that goal. I don't see there's anything wrong with me and I don't take medicine. Good for you. Good for you. That's so cool. But it takes something to maintain that. So the conversations become almost interactively fun, entertaining, sharing, human, real, using me perhaps for my 67 years or my 45 years in the mental health field or, the day after day effort to learn how to be in good communication since I was this tiny. That's cool. People can tap into that. I don't even think I have anything, but some people think I do, which is kind of cool, like that's cool that I somehow earned that right. I didn't even know I was acquiring it on the way through, let alone like a wise person about it. Hilarious. Truly, truly, truly flipping hilarious. No kidding. Life is funny. That's funny. I surely didn't feel like I was picking up wise nuggets along the way. That isn't what it felt like. It's interesting though. Here I am, 67 years, and that's in a human lifetime, that's a good substantial amount of years where I've been committed to communication. All right. This is what that looks like when Fred Moss chose to be committed when he was like 5 to communication and stuck on that train above all else. 62 years later, this is what that looks like. All right. That's how it goes in the second. You're asking like what happens after that happens, what is there to do once someone gets that they're okay and they don't need medicines to prove or disprove that.
Do you help them maintain that as well?
Yeah,
because you said there was a maintenance piece to that as well. Do you work with that as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the problem with this is the way the medical system is set up. When I still work in a medical practice. I have a medical practice that has allowed me they vetted me out on a podcast. So before I got the job, they heard me on a podcast talking a little bit like this. And then they called me and said, we want to work with you. It's like, okay, well, and then I've been with them for about like a year and a half. So they know what I'm doing a little bit. They let me play with my elbows out, but not my wings spread. That's the way I am because I still have to diagnose and medicate. And both those things, I'm telling you, both those things are like, what is it? Death by 1,000 cuts, like that.
Yeah, it is, I guess, very heavily regulated, licensed, all those fun things that you have to adhere to and abide by in order to practice psychiatry. So it's probably sometimes challenging. Yeah.
It's a dance. And yeah.
But I'm glad you're sharing this with us today. I feel like our listeners need to hear this and need to understand that there is a different path for them available if they so choose and if they're comfortable with that, if they're okay with looking inside a little bit and maybe taking some of that personal responsibility and they're all right with that, then there is a path, a more holistic path that is out there for them. Now, how do you work
There's
with
two things I want to put it before we slide away from this. Number one, psychiatry if you go to a psychiatrist enough times, you go to a barbershop enough times, you get a haircut, right? You go to a psychiatrist enough times, you get a diagnosis. It only takes one time. See, a psychiatrist doesn't get paid if they don't give you a diagnosis. A psychiatrist does not get paid for a well baby visit. It's not how that works. You walk out, you're walking out with a diagnosis. People should know that because that diagnosis isn't going away. Whatever that doc thought about saying about you when it came for diagnosis, that just became a blotch for you. That's number one. But the flip side of that, which is we're just referring to, is I need to justify continuing to see you in order to do so. So if you're well and you're not taking medicine, and our conversations are advancing you in the world like you've never heard, I still need to give you something for which I can justify continuation of our relationship with the insurance companies who are not supportive of that experience. Just worth knowing. I thought that would fit in right here, like seeing that, oh yeah, there's some hand tying here that's really important to get for everybody, doctors included.
Yeah. And thank you for pointing that out and explaining that. That is a really important piece to know. Also, of course, for the people you work with and the clients and patients you see, it gives us some insight into how the system works and what we can expect when we come to see a psychiatrist. And yeah, that's very interesting. So how do you work with people today? Are you still in private practice? So if our listeners are curious and they'd like to work with you, are you limited to working with people in certain geographical areas, or how does that work?
Yeah, I'm a coach. I'm a transformational restorative coach, and my coaching services are available. They're conversations. That's what it's based on. And, conversations, when I'm a coach, I don't use my medical licensure. I don't diagnose, and I don't medicate, and I don't hospitalize, and I don't do that. That's made very clear before we start a coaching relationship. We have strong conversations, open and honest conversations about what's so and what isn't so, and how to express ourselves open and cleanly. I have 2 books, Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. And my other book's called Find Your True Voice. I'm sure those titles shock you, but that's what we have here. It's like, let's do it. Let's teach me how, and let's do it.
Amazing. And as a coach, I'm guessing there isn't as many restrictions of having to work with people in certain states or anything like that. As a coach, you can probably work freely.
I can work anywhere.
Online. Yeah. Perfect.
You definitely don't get me to diagnose you. If you want a diagnosis, then I'm not your guy.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I'm not your guy. However, if you come on through my agency, then you want a diagnosis, then I am your guy. Because I part of that's the difference between the elbow and the wings is I got to be that guy for that job. It's a little bit of a less of a soul sacrifice than some of the other typecast jobs I've had over the 45 years in the field. Some of them have asked me to do stuff that would have sliced me, and emotionally, and I had to stop working like at that moment. It happened 4 times in my career, where it's like, I'm sorry, this is not 2-week notice material. Actually, no, I don't have 2 more weeks available to do this. I have 0 more times available to do this.
Yeah, it goes to show a little bit that the field still has a long ways to come, I feel. And a lot of development still to happen there. So to bring that respect and that support that you were talking about in the very beginning to people and to individuals. Yeah. So thank you for sharing those insights with us, and thank you for sharing how our listeners could work with you if they were inspired by this conversation, and maybe some things kind of went off in the back of their heads, or they were recognizing themselves in some of the things that you were speaking about. and they'd like to work with you, we, of course, will be linking to everything that you offer in the show notes. And our listeners can find out there how they can connect with you if they are looking for a diagnosis, and if they would like to work with you more in a coaching setting on their health or any other challenges that you could work with them on, then that, of course, will work online and they can do that from anywhere. So thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Fred, and for sharing this wisdom that you have gathered over this really long time in just hands-on experience that you have in the field. I truly appreciate it. And thank you for joining me here today.
Yeah, Petra, thank you for having me. It's been a blast. And, thank you for allowing me to dig a little deeper than usual into these topics and really, feel like today it was more, sometimes I have to spin doctor my podcast appearances and start saying stuff that the phrase, the buzzwords that I use when there's time. And this time I felt like we got into an area that was a little more heartfelt, and it's good job. Good job for doing it.
Oh, thank you for that. I feel like that is really what I want to give to our listeners, a very honest and heartfelt look at these things, not some of the more polished stuff that they could maybe read online, but some of that really raw and vulnerable, the real stuff that they're going to be experiencing or are experiencing at the moment. So thank you for being part of that and jumping in the deep end with me. I really appreciate it. And take really good care of yourself, Dr. Fred, and keep shining that light. I truly appreciate your work.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejōrni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.